So Nirav and Megha Tolia, fascinating conversation. We touched on all the things that I think you would expect to. His background as an entrepreneur, what's happening at Nextdoor, her career, both phenomenal careers. But what was more interesting to me was the interaction between the two and really them talking about their lives and how they got to where they are.
Yeah, they're partners in life, in family, and in business. They've got deep and rich educational backgrounds, really, of the most premier institutions in America. And what's really neat is now they're in Dallas. They're like California transplants almost by way of Florence, Italy, which was a fun story that we get into. And what's really neat, to your point, Tom, is just their interaction, their dynamic, their energy together really spoke volumes on this podcast.
There was a lot of energy. You can see where the success has come from, both of them.
Really cool. I think what's neat, too, is Megha has been incredibly successful in the TV entertainment production space, which was not something that I think she grew up doing, but something that ultimately she got an opportunity and she ran with it, ultimately becoming president and COO of Shondaland.
And that's something I appreciate because I've led organizations, 5 different industries, and you see how different they are. She kind of talked about some of the similarities, but the differences, especially related to culture, and to be able to maneuver from something that is staid brand management all the way to entertainment and media, I think says a lot about her.
Family, business, personal, we cover a lot. Tune in. Welcome to Intersections, where we take a multi-generational look at the critical issues facing America. Tom, today's going to be really fun.
It will be, and it's a 2-for-1. Nirav and Megha Tolia, and a great couple. Nirav has been the founder and is currently the CEO of Nextdoor, in addition to a number of other entrepreneurial activities that we'll talk about.
Yep.
Megha, great background educationally, went into brand management, was the president, COO of Shondaland, and we're going to have an interesting conversation.
It's going to be really fun. And you're new to Dallas. As of the last couple of years.
Relatively new.
Relatively new.
Don't call us Californians who moved to Dallas, even though we kind of are. I grew up in Texas, so I'm still holding on to that.
And let's start there. Yeah. Interesting background, because you were born in Philadelphia, but then moved to Odessa, only Indian in your elementary school, in your school. What was that like from a background standpoint? Odessa, Philadelphia, and only Indian. That doesn't sound like it works all together.
As someone who identifies as a Texan, I don't appreciate that you threw the Philadelphia out there because I was only there for a year, right? And I don't like the Eagles, and I don't like the East in general. No, I'm just kidding. I feel like a Texan because when I was younger than I can even remember, my parents moved to Odessa, Texas, West Texas, Friday Night Lights land. And I didn't know it at the time. You know, you said an unusual background, right? I didn't know it at the time because as a kid, you just kind of live wherever you are. But I was one of the only Indians. My parents were Indian physician number 2 and 3 to move to the Odessa Midland area. And so I was one of the first Indian kids that went through the schools.
And what drew them there? What got you there?
It's a great question because, you know, most people look at me and they say, Odessa, Texas.
Sure.
And I say, well, I didn't make that decision, right? So you're going to have to ask my parents. My parents are both physicians. My dad in particular is an eye surgeon. And there was an eye surgeon in Odessa, Texas, Dr. John Sheets, who was doing cutting edge cataract surgery. And so my father, who'd been educated in India and then had immigrated and they'd settled in Philadelphia, really wanted to do something cutting edge in the area of cataract surgery. And this guy, Dr. Sheets, was the guy. So my parents visited Odessa. It was flat. It was brown. There weren't any other Indians. It was very different than what they were accustomed to. But he met Dr. Sheets, and he was completely taken by this idea of being on the cutting edge of cataract surgery. And so they looked around and they said, okay, this isn't exactly where we would choose to live, but we'll come here, we'll save every penny for 5 or 6 years, and then we'll live wherever we want to live. 40 years later, they were still in Odessa.
That happens often. Now, you mentioned your parents were in medicine, and you started down that track and then went to Stanford and kind of veered off of the medicine track.
I'm a little bit of a black sheep in my family because I have one sibling, a younger brother, and he's a physician like both my mom and dad. Both of my grandfathers are also physicians. And so growing up, my parents didn't put pressure on me to be a doctor. I wanted to be a doctor. It was all that I saw. And it was an amazing thing to see because my parents practiced small town medicine where they were respected parts of the community. They made a good living. They loved what they did. They had great work-life balance. And so if you grew up in my environment, you'd want to be a doctor too. I did go to Stanford, so I got out of Texas and went to the West Coast for college, and I was a pre-med at Stanford, thinking even at that time that I was going to be a doctor. But I wasn't nearly as good as a pre-med as I wanted to be, and so ultimately, life led me in a different direction.
So where did the entrepreneurial spirit come from?
Well, it's a very good question because I still don't know. I'm still trying to figure that out. But when I was at Stanford, I was part of an a cappella group, a singing group, because growing up in West Texas, of course, I was singing all the time. It's something that people do in Texas. And so I went to Stanford. I joined a group called the Stanford Fleet Street Singers, an all-male collegiate a cappella group. And 1 year in the group, they needed a business manager. Everyone in the group sings, but one person is the musical director and one is the business manager. And so I became the business manager, not really knowing anything about business. But as I experienced it, I realized I loved business. I loved the competition of trying to make Fleet Street the best a cappella group in the country. And I could do that through the lens of business. Better marketing,
and the competition
better
was
pricing,
on the East Coast,
better strategy.
Right?
The Yale Whiffenpoofs are known as the top and kind of the gold standard. But I will say by my senior year, the Fleet Street Singers won the Collegiate A Cappella Award for the best album that year. So we actually bested the Whiffenpoofs. And so it was really kind of a very serendipitous and fortunate experience, not just being in Fleet Street, but really being at Stanford. Because Stanford is a place that has such an incredible tradition of entrepreneurship. It's not something that's unusual there to walk around campus and have people talking about starting companies. And so Fleet Street, plus being at Stanford, plus finally I was there in the early 90s when the dot-com boom started. Those things kind of came together and gave me an alternate way to go about things versus being a doctor. At the time, I didn't know that it could be successful. I didn't know that it would even be a career. And so it's an interesting lesson that I think sometimes Megha and I think about as we think about our children, because our children say, should we be doctors? Should we be entrepreneurs? What should we do, right? And I was probably much more of an intentional person growing up. I have to go to this college. I have to be a doctor. I have to do these things. And then I wake up, 20 or 30 years later, and none of those things actually came true.
But intentional, you're a Cowboys fan.
I am a Cowboys fanatic. I love the Cowboys.
They may need some management help.
Yeah, I just wanted to add that I think your brother would say your entrepreneurial spirit started at a very young age. I've been told that Nirav invented many business ideas as a child and was extremely good at delegating and recruiting the workforce, i.e. his brother and his friends. I think the car wash is one example. So I think you started pretty early and realized you wanted to be the CEO. Whether I knew it or not,
the entrepreneurial roots ran deep.
Well,
right?
we talked about contrast and we talked about business. Let's turn to you for a second. Grew up in Los Angeles, so a little bit different cultural environment than Odessa. Really focused on dance, UC Berkeley, and then on to Harvard Business School.
Yes.
Tell us about your background.
Well, it starts off with my parents, as Nirav's story does as well. My parents immigrated here from India, my dad in the late 60s, and then my mom upon marriage in 1975. My father is the youngest of 8 children, 4 girls and 4 boys, and he and his older brother decided they wanted to come to the U.S. to pursue new opportunities. Really, his older brother, who then opened up the door for any of the remaining siblings that wanted to come. So my dad got his PhD from USC and in electrical engineering, worked in California and then in Bell Laboratories. He met my mom in 1975. They got married. And similar to that movie, The Namesake, which I actually always think about my parents when I read the book and then watched the movie, my mom took a leap of faith, married this handsome man from India, but then America, and moved to New Jersey. So our story started there. Ultimately, my dad and my mom were the only ones of my dad's side of the family that were on the East Coast. And when my dad thought about it, as they were starting a family, he said, all my siblings now are in California. I've already left my home country. Why would we be this far? So really for family, they decided to move to California and be near his brother and his sisters. So I lived an idyllic childhood, I will say. It was so beautiful, surrounded with all of my cousins. Family is a core value of ours. And I really think when you immigrate from a country and you're blessed to have your siblings, they are your siblings, they are your friends, they are your support network. And as my parents started to grow in their adulthood and find friends, I think that support and steadiness with their family was always remained steadfast. So to me, my cousins were my best friends. My uncle and my aunts were like second parents. And so that was kind of the focus of my childhood growing up in Palos Verdes, which is a suburb of Los Angeles. I was the typical sort of American kid, although I definitely feel like I had a bicultural life, and I would distinguish between being American and Indian, even though it's funny to think about that distinction now. But we had this beautiful exposure to our Indian culture and our roots. So a lot of my life was spent watching Bollywood movies, doing Indian dances, where my love of dance initially started, learning about our religion and our cultural rituals. And then I had this quote unquote American life where I was growing up in Los Angeles, learning about sports, learning about American dance, ballet, jazz, hip hop, being exposed to the great American life that we live today. But I definitely had always this appreciation for where my parents came from and where I'm from originally.
And that interest, that focus on heritage, in addition to English, you're fluent in Gujarati as well as Hindu. And you've got an interesting philanthropic effort back in Gujarat.
Yes. Well, I would love to say that I am fluent in Gujarati and Hindi, but unfortunately,
better pronunciation.
Yes, no, I'm conversant. I would say I can understand the languages very well. I'm not as great at speaking it. I fault my parents because they spoke to us in their language at home, and then we would respond in English. So my siblings and I are pretty good at following along the conversation, but when we go to try to speak it, we sound like we've never even spoken the language before. And it is, I have a love of languages. I do speak Italian and Spanish better than I do my own languages. But yes,
fluent Italian.
Hearing those languages just again was another way that we were rooted in our culture. And yes, my family has an ashram in India that has been kind of the main focus of both of our philanthropic efforts. And it's a small ashram in Gujarat, but that's where my dad's sister and brother-in-law, they were the ones that founded it and had been running it for the last 60 years.
Yeah, it's about education, by the way. And as a business person, we love to talk about metrics, right? And so when Megha shared with me some of the metrics around the ashram, and in particular, tell them how much does it cost? This is an ashram about educating children who would not have access, particularly women, who would not have access to educational opportunities in the village where they grow up. How much does it cost? If you think about donating and being one of those people who gives back, how much does it cost to educate one student for 1 year in this ashram?
Right now, it's about $300 to $400 to support one student for an entire academic year. That includes their boarding and their school supplies. But the ashram is divided into two areas. One, we provide access to the children in surrounding rural areas to have access to education. So they can live at home, they can work on the farm, but then they come into town or into where the ashram is and they get educated. So it's from preschool all the way to high school. But then we also have on the property an orphanage where unfortunately children don't have parents, and we are able to provide the full life for these kids, and that's under 50 kids there.
Both of you have talked about your family, the deep roots. You've got 3 children. Talk a little bit kind of the core principles that you're trying to instill in those 3 boys.
I think first and foremost, we want our children to be very focused on work ethic and hard work. We've seen it with our own parents. They hopefully see it with us. But in the end, I think the two of us really believe there are no shortcuts to hard work. If you put in the work, the outcome will come. So we really focus on that. Obviously, then education, family, those are very, very core to us. But we really want our boys to not take things for granted and to work hard for everything that they get. And that realizing when you earn something on your own, that feeling of accomplishment is bar none.
Yeah, and we were really blessed growing up because our parents gave us incredible opportunities and they sacrificed to put us into the situations that we were in. We feel like we are doing much of that for our children. And so the least they can do is develop work ethic. And then most importantly, they need to be kind and generous human beings. They have to give back as much as they take. And that was something that our parents taught us as well.
When you hear this and you see the success that they've had, I mentioned in the introduction, both from a business standpoint, little institutions like Stanford, Berkeley, and Harvard. Don't you want to take an option on their 3 kids in the future?
How do we do that?
I can't believe we're still married being Berkeley and Stanford.
Yeah,
I mean,
no,
it's
how
a
does that
huge
work?
That Stanford
How does
doesn't
that
like
work?
Berkeley
When we
and
had our
Harvard.
first child, it was what onesie is he going to wear? Is it going to be blue and gold, or is it going to be?
It was a Stanford one.
It was.
Yeah, it was. We lived in the Bay Area, so
I wasn't in the
it was
right
kinda
state of mind.
natural.
Yeah, exactly.
When we think about our children and the blessings they have, because they are in different environments, they go to private schools. We were talking about that before. We went to public schools, right? And when I applied to Stanford, I think I was the first person from my high school to even apply to Stanford. And Megha tells a story about how Harvard Business School was this incredibly aspirational thing that she did because no one she knew directly had gone to Harvard Business School, right? Well, for our kids, it's totally different. And on one level, that is a blessing. On another, it's a little bit of a curse because what our children tell us all the time is, yes, we know that we didn't have to walk backwards barefoot through the snow to school like you all did when you were kids, right? But we have different challenges. We have to live up to all of these things. And they're in environments where the kids are all really smart and they all work really hard and they all have a lot of opportunities. And so one of the things that we've had to learn is different environments, different challenges. No matter what environment you grow up in, you're going to have challenges, right? And the important thing is, can you rise to meet those challenges? That's really the key.
And they've been blessed to have some opportunities that a lot of other kids never have that you didn't have
growing up.
seemingly at that time, but you made it for yourself.
They can be Cowboys fans, which I was, and now my wife is, right? But yes, many of the other things, exposure we feel is a very powerful tool for learning.
Absolutely.
If you can't see it, it's hard to be it. And so even for them to live in Dallas and be in a place like the Metroplex, which is really booming. We lived in Italy for 2 years. For them to live in a foreign country, for them to grow up in Silicon Valley, these are all incredible opportunities for them to understand what's going on in the world. And they shouldn't take them for granted.
And that's a very insightful comment because, folks that have been privileged to have the type of educations that all of us have had, their children understand the importance of an education just by having seen it. But then you think of so many kids in this nation and across the world who don't have any understanding of the importance of education because they've had no role models, no exposure, those sorts of things. It's a very different world.
Yeah. So want to go a couple different places. One, tell us how you met. How did all that happen and ultimately, obviously, start your life together? But then we'll jump into kind of professional life experience on both ends.
Yeah.
So give us.
Well, whose story do you want? Mine or his? We have different versions.
Here we go.
Quite see
I will say it was a blind setup. I will start with that.
Yeah, it's an interesting story because it's improbable, but it now in retrospect, I can't imagine being with anyone else in the world. And when I think about all the things that we have in common, it's really kind of magical because there was no reason for us to encounter each other. I mean, we're 9 years apart in age. I'm 9 years younger. I was living in San Francisco.
You were 9
She was
years
in
older.
Sorry, did I say?
I think he would like to be 9 years older. I was wondering if that was a joke.
Is that a joke?
But then I realized the way he kept going, he believed it.
Yeah, I do
If
like
you will
to,
it into existence,
entrepreneurs,
it might
right?
come true.
Yeah, that's right. 9
Speak it,
years
it happens.
older, as you can tell from the way we look. I was in San Francisco, she was in Santa Monica, and so it was improbable, it was coincidental, and it was the greatest blessing. I hope for both of us, certainly for me, but we were set up by a common friend. I had a friend who I'd worked with for many years, and I was at a 40th, maybe it was a birthday or maybe it was a wedding anniversary. I don't remember. It was a 10-year wedding anniversary, the only single person there. And I sat next to my friend's wife, and she looked at me and she said, "Well, you're the only single person here. What's wrong with you?" And I said, "Well, how much time do you have?" Because, that's going to be a long story, right? And I said, "Don't you have someone for me?" And she said, "Oh, let me think. Come on, I don't really. Oh, I might have one person. I have one person who my best friend is the cousin of this person in Southern California." And I said, "Well, tell me about this person."
Speaking of just the importance of family, so my uncle, my dad's older brother, lived 4 houses down from us growing up. So his 2 daughters, Lisa and Sarah, are among the many cousins that we're very close to. So as a kid, Sarah and Lisa and their friends, they were 9 years and 12 years older than me. They were around babysitting us, changing our diapers. So Sarah, at the age of 19, I'm 10. But so all of her friends were around and growing up with us or saw us grow up. So this best friend of Sarah, her name is Shannon Lanzone, and that's who he sat next to at the party. So Shannon calls Sarah and says, "What's Megha up to these days?"
Well, it's kind of crazy because Shannon Lanzone's husband, my friend, is Jim Lanzone, who's currently the CEO of a company called Yahoo, which was the technology company that I worked for right out of college. Now, he wasn't the CEO back then. He's become the CEO later. But Shannon said, "I have someone for you, and I believe that you and this woman have similar smiles." And that was actually the comment.
So what was the attraction?
Yeah,
the first time you met?
Look at her. I mean, what do you think the attraction was? Come on.
No. I mean, for me,
Megha is someone who is beautiful inside and out. And I really wanted someone who was in many ways as ambitious, as thoughtful, as intentional about things as I felt like I was. And whether that's how we create a family, how we raise our children, how we think about our values and our family members. And ultimately what I found, because Megha is the first Indian woman that I had ever dated, but what I found when we started dating was because our cultural heritages were so strong and such a big part of who we were, there was almost this unspoken language where we just knew each other. Even though we hadn't lived together, we hadn't spent time together, we hadn't grown up together, we'd had so many of the same
experiences.
Family,
Indian, or combination?
It was all of those things. Really, I would say many of the values of growing up, not just as an Indian, but as an Indian immigrant's child, that was a shared experience for Megha and I. And it brought us together in ways large and small, and it created an instant bond. And then, of course, like in any other relationship, we started to spend time together, and then you create your own bond from there.
I think, as cheesy as it sounds, but when I first heard Nirav's voice, it was on the phone, I felt this sense of home. There was something so familiar about his voice, and I'll never forget that our first conversation, it started at around 9 p.m., and the next thing I knew it was 2 or 3 in the morning. And to me, that was just a sign we were just best friends or becoming best friends. And it was rooted in this sense of respect, admiration, and all of the above that provides for a great foundation for a partnership. Not to mention, that some of the things he said about me, I definitely felt with Nirav from the start. He is ambitious. He is humble. He is generous, so hardworking. All the things that I could never have imagined I would have in a partner. And so he kind of is my knight in shining armor, and I'm so lucky.
So you made a comment that I guess someone asked you, what's Megha up to these days when y'all first met? What were you up to kind of in those days? And then walk us through how you ultimately became president and COO of Shondaland and what you got to work on over the years.
Well, what was Megha up to? I was dating somebody else at the time. So that's why there was a little bit of a...
The story we don't tell is how many months it took me to get her attention after that initial introduction, which is to say many months. But it was worth it.
Yeah, I'm kidding.
It was worth it.
I was living in Santa Monica, in Los Angeles at the time, working at Neutrogena. This is post-business school. So I was at Johnson & Johnson, which Neutrogena is an operating company, part of Johnson & Johnson, before business school. And then I had returned to Neutrogena afterwards. I didn't know that was going to be the case, but it ended up being so, and I'm so glad it was. But when I was working at Neutrogena, I was so focused on building my life around brand management. I was being groomed to hopefully take over the company one day, and it was just my dream. I loved beauty. I loved how fast-paced it was. I remember in our early days of dating, Nirav would say, I don't understand how you like to work with physical things that sit on a shelf and that you have to sell. Like, what about the software? What about technology? And I said, well, you go to Walgreens and buy deodorant, don't you? There is value for these products. And so I loved what I did. I loved the life that I was building. I learned so much in my time in brand management. And really it goes back to, I guess, how did I fall into brand management, which out of undergrad. So when I was graduating Berkeley, unlike Nirav, I wanted to know what I wanted to do, but the reality is I didn't. And that, as someone who is a planner, my older sister, she is a doctor. And I always wanted to follow her footsteps. But very early on, I realized that I didn't think medicine was for me. I like to kind of work smarter, not harder. So I thought, that's a lot of years of school. How can I do this in a more efficient way? And so I was a little bit lost because in my family, we had doctors and engineers. We didn't have that many examples of business people. So it was a little bit of uncharted territory. So it was career week at Berkeley, and I'm thinking I want to go into communications, public relations, but I'm at every booth. Like, I've got the popcorn in hand, I'm chatting it up, I'm trying to learn about every industry. One day I was all about finance. The next I was thinking about living the life of a consultant, getting on a plane, focusing on how chic I would try to look while I was traveling. I had lots of visions of different vignettes of my life. Interestingly enough, I came across the Johnson & Johnson folks, and they talked to me about a program that they had and why they were at Berkeley that year in particular, and it was called the Marketing Leadership Development Program. I feel really, really lucky that they had that program that year because the context of what was going on at the time is that a lot of the MBA students graduating from all of these top universities were actually going to work in tech and during the dot-com kind of era. So I think what the consumer products companies were finding is they were having a hard time attracting top-tier talent out of MBAs.
Sure.
Because typically you start in brand management as an assistant brand manager, but you have to have an MBA. So smartly, Johnson & Johnson developed this program called the Marketing Leadership Development Program. And they said, what if we recruit high potential, hungry, talented 22-year-olds fresh out of college and we train them?
So was graduate school part of the plan back then?
Part of my plan? Yes. Graduate school was always a part of my plan. I didn't know at the time if it would be an MBA or if it would be a master's in something else. But graduate school was always part of my plan, probably because my dad has a PhD, my uncle had his master's. It was sort of the obvious next step for us. But I got accepted into this program, and I was only one of 6 in the nation. And every operating company at Johnson & Johnson had their MLDP, as we were referred to. And this is where luck meets opportunity. I was very lucky to get accepted into this, and then I seized the opportunity. So the program was set up. It was such that you would go through these rotations and you would learn all aspects of the business. So did I know at the time brand management was for me? No, I didn't. But I fell in love with it because I got a window into running an entire business by just being in one position. Because brand managers are essentially general managers.
Got it.
You own a P&L all the way to contribution margin. You have to understand the puts and takes. You're sort of front end and back end. Front end, in this case, I'm referring to as the consumer, right? You've got to think about what does he or she want that they don't know that they want yet. And then the back end is all of the operating side. How do you do it in the most profitable way? How do you do it in the most efficient way? What does design look like? So I got this window into running a business, soup to nuts, forecasting, supply chain, words that I had never even heard of. But I learned this, and it was effectively a crash course, and I loved it.
Well, Nirav, you went from Stanford right into the Bay Valley or the
Silicon Valley, yes,
and saw that. You were the 84th employee for Yahoo?
Yeah, which is to say that no one was willing to go work at Yahoo back then, except for folks like me who didn't know what they were doing. But it was 1996. The dot-com boom had just begun. In fact, Yahoo was not even a public company yet. Netscape had gone public, if you remember Netscape, and they pioneered the first commercial web browser. And so the web browser itself, what we take for granted today, had just been invented. And I saw so much possibility, not ever thinking that I was a technologist or an entrepreneur or even a business person. But the opportunity I saw was growing up in Odessa, Texas, one's geography really marks their experience. You live in West Texas, Dallas is 300 miles away, El Paso is 300 miles away. You're kind of in the middle of nowhere, right? You can't just drive to the big city and see what's going on. Then this thing called the internet comes along, and you can access anything around the world using the internet, no matter if you're in Odessa or on the top of Mount Everest. And that insight, even today, I think, that was obvious to me. Now, it wasn't obvious that it would turn into a giant revolution in the world of business and in the world overall, right? But it was very obvious to me that this was a very powerful thing for people. that would give them the ability to do things they couldn't normally do. And so Yahoo is a company that had been started by Stanford students. There were 2 grad students living in a trailer on Stanford campus that had created this guide to the World Wide Web. And it was the hottest company around if you even knew what the internet was. Now, funny story about Yahoo, there's a chocolate milk company called Yahoo. And so my parents are sitting there in Odessa, Texas, having no exposure to technology or anything other than medicine. And they think, okay, our eldest son, we're so proud of him. He gets into Stanford. He goes to Stanford. He's going to be a doctor. And then he calls home one day and he says he's not going to go to medical school after all. He's going to go work for a company called Yahoo. They knew what Yahoo was, but in their community of Indian physicians, I really think many of their friends thought that I was delivering milk. I turned into a milk delivery man because I was working for a company
there's nothing wrong with
that does milk, right? Now, at that point, Yahoo went public, and then CNBC took off, and everyone started watching all of the stocks of these companies and everything else that was going on, and the internet became more mainstream. Then it seemed obvious, but it's an important lesson that, again, I have to remind myself, particularly as I look at our own sons. Sometimes it's not completely obvious. I think Megha said the same thing. I mean, she was not looking for the marketing leadership development program, right? She was not looking to be the general manager of a P&L. She was serendipitous. She was open to opportunity. And the same thing happened for me.
But Nirav, I want to go back to one thing you said. You were talking about Yahoo, but you have often said, and we'll get into Nextdoor, that it's the local focused network that really is the driver on social interactions and social networks, as opposed to the large mass, I think you say, forced down platforms. Yahoo, you'd really put in the latter category. Nextdoor and where your success has been, you put in the former category.
Well, you know,
balance those.
I would kind of take a step back. One of my favorite people, a good friend and really a wonderful mentor of mine, is the founder of a company called LinkedIn. His name is Reid Hoffman. Mm-hmm. He's one of the giants in our industry. Now he's one of the top people in AI. I mean, he's done so many incredible things. And as I got to know him in the late 90s, he had this theory about entrepreneurship. He said, entrepreneurs tend to work on the same problem their entire careers. It could be over several companies. It could be the same company. It could be in and out of different companies, but it's the same problem. And so that problem for me that I always gravitate to is, how do you create the best environment for yourself? And growing up in Odessa, I did feel that in many ways, it wasn't always the best environment for me to be exposed to things that I couldn't see. So then I found the internet, right?
Well, I think the other thing that you've been on the quest your whole life to solving is, how do you foster and build community? Yeah. Because in every job that you have done, starting with Yahoo, then Epinions, it's always been around bringing community and groups of people together to make the 1 + 1 3.
And that is what I mean by vibrant environment. A vibrant environment is one where you're not alone. A vibrant environment is one where you feel like your people exist and you can tap into them, where the power of we is much greater than the power of me. And in Odessa, if you weren't like the other people there, you kind of felt alone. So then the internet comes along and you can access other people that maybe don't exist in Odessa. Coming all the way full circle to Nextdoor, when I was sitting there in San Francisco in 2010, looking at the amazing things the internet had created, I saw such richness in virtual environments that the internet had created. But at the same time, our physical environments had not been made as rich by technology. And so Nextdoor was an attempt to say, look, you got that great community experience when you go online. You can find someone that you can resonate with immediately, right? But what about right outside your front door? And what had been happening in America was the childhood that my kids were destined for was very different than the childhood that we grew up with, where we knew our neighbors, where we had strong social bonds, where that access to community locally was something that you would take for granted because it was for everyone. It didn't exist anymore. And so that was the inspiration for Nextdoor.
I think you quote a statistic that says only 30% of people know their next-door neighbors.
Yeah, when we started Nextdoor in the summer of 2010, there was a very inspirational article in the New York Times that was about a guy named Robert Putnam, who had been the chair of the sociology department at Harvard and had written a book called Bowling Alone. Bowling Alone is about the decline of community, the decline of social cohesion in America. And one of the statistics, as we were doing research on that particular opportunity to rebuild community, to bring community back, the Pew Institute had done a study, and in the summer of 2010, almost a third of Americans could not name a single neighbor by name, not even one, right? You think about Nextdoor today, we have 100 million registered neighbors operating in 11 countries around the world, 99% of neighborhoods in America. If you go log on to Nextdoor, you will immediately see the name of one of your neighbors, right?
So I want to go deep and technical into the Nextdoor just for a second here. When Zuckerberg was starting Facebook and went through kind of the network effects type of, call it theology, business theology of how to get users to multiply out, y'all had to think about something similar at Nextdoor because obviously you're creating a social network. Tell me about the early days in the war room with kind of the other early employees. How did you think about the network effects of growing your user base to ultimately build a social machine?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very counter example to Facebook. And I look over at Megha because Megha and I met, I think, 4 months before Nextdoor was conceived of. And so during the early years of Nextdoor, I met Megha, I married Megha, we had 3 kids, and she unfortunately had to hear about every single conversation, whether it was about network effects or anything else, right? Sure. But the idea of network effects is core to technology. And it's this notion that in an interconnected web of whether it's people or computers or other nodes of information, every single node or person or entity that you add adds value to every other entity in that system because it's an incremental piece of value that can be accessed by everyone. So the way that works on Facebook is you invite your friends to Facebook because they not only get value out of accessing your profile, you get value out of accessing theirs. Now, the challenge with Nextdoor is it was about communicating not with the whole world. It was about communicating with one's neighbors. So there was a network effect, but the network effect was quite a bit smaller. I mean, if you think about classic neighborhood has maybe 200 people to 1,000 people, right? And so we have had to create in our 300,000 plus neighborhoods that use Nextdoor individual network effects in every single one of those neighborhoods. And I mean, it's still a work in progress because with 100 million verified neighbors using Nextdoor, Facebook has 3 billion, right? So why do we have 100 million? They have 3 billion, right? It's because it's really hard to do it locally.
I want to delve into Nextdoor a little bit more, but let's kind of get in between, so to speak, the Yahoo days and the Nextdoor days. So as Megha mentioned, you founded Epinions. That was merged into shopping.com, went public, eventually sold to eBay for north of $600 million. That experience, talk about that, but also you had a piece in there of a failure that didn't go so well.
Yeah, I mean, I lived the Silicon Valley dream, all the highs and all the lows. Megha was in elementary school, so she was not with me for those days as she was for the Nextdoor days, right? But what was going on in Silicon Valley at that time was really kind of, you would say magical, because any 20-year-old kid believed that he or she could start a company and it could become a $1 billion entity. It could become a public company that was serving millions, if not hundreds of millions of users. And if you kind of take a step back and say, well, that's just something you take for granted, it's kind of amazing. Going all the way back to the Ashram idea, the Ashram has an orphanage where these kids don't even have parents. And in Silicon Valley, you have kids walking around thinking that they can be the next Mark Zuckerberg, right? It was really an unbelievable environment to be in. And I consider myself a true lottery ticket winner to have been there during that time. So I'm at Yahoo. I'm loving it. I'm there as one of the first 100 employees, employee 84. Over 3 years, there are now 10,000 employees. The value of the company has gone from 100 million to 100 billion. We're serving over 100 million users, right? I mean, it was truly living the dream. And Yahoo was a beloved consumer brand. And so one of the things that Megha and I always talk about, because she's the expert at consumer packaged goods, your dream is to create a product that people love, right? Because that is almost compensation in and of itself. I remember walking down University Avenue in Palo Alto, California with a Yahoo t-shirt on, and I would get mobbed. People coming up to me, oh, Yahoo, you work at Yahoo? I love Yahoo. I use it all the time, right? And so when you get that kind of reinforcement, strangely, you start thinking as a 26 or 27-year-old kid, what if I could create my own Yahoo? Wouldn't that be amazing? And so I was one of the first people to leave Yahoo in 1999 to start my own company because I wanted to try to do that thing myself. And so I started this company with 4 other folks called Epinions. And the idea behind Epinions, it was once again online community. It was this notion that if we pool together collective knowledge about things, electronic opinions, Epinions, right? Nobody is smarter than everybody. And so whether it's a buying decision that you're trying to make and you need consumer reviews, or whether it's something that you need more expertise in, look at what ChatGPT, Wikipedia, YouTube, all those things are examples of user-generated content communities that are serving you in a different way than the old days. In the old days, we'd pick up a book or we'd have to speak to a teacher, right? Those things are still very valuable, but having access to what we call the hive mind, all the expertise that exists, that's a very powerful idea. So that was the idea behind Epinions. We were actually one of the hottest companies at the beginning in 1999 and 2000. Then the dot-com bust happened. We had 200 people. We went down to 20. I remember at one point we were 3 weeks away from going out of business. I went home during the Christmas holiday, and my parents would look at me every day. I think I took 5 or 6 days off, and they'd say, "You kind of look like you're sleepwalking through the days and nights." And I would say, "Well, yeah, I am," because I'm thinking to myself, when I go back in January, how am I going to keep the lights on, right? And so having to go through all of that as a young, I wasn't even 30 years old, and I was the CEO of this thing, right? You're wearing your successes and failures right on your shirt for everyone to see. It was difficult. It was very challenging. And so ultimately, the story of Epinions, we slowly but surely made it through the dot-com bust. We merged with another company. We called the merged company shopping.com. We took that public in 2004. eBay bought it, right? But there were many, you said that there was a failure or two along the way. The truth is there were many failures. In fact, lots of entrepreneurs have this expression, entrepreneurial success is 999 defeats ending in one resounding victory. Because that's what it is. Every time something doesn't work out, you learn something. You put it back in the machine and you can go one step further. And so there were many failures during that time. Ultimately, it was a success, which I feel very, very, very grateful and blessed for. But then after that company, I started another online community company that was in the sports world because, I grew up in Odessa. I went to Odessa Permian. Yeah, I know the power of Friday Night Lights.
Sure.
And this company, Fanbase, within, I think, 6 months or a year, it had over 10 million users. The problem is none of those users stuck around. And so after 2 years of working on this, my co-founders and I, most of whom had been at Epinions with me, said, I don't think this is going to work. And so then you have to confront that really difficult truth of, okay, is this the one where I need to have 100 more failures and that's going to lead to success? Or is the failure here teaching me that I need to do something different? And that ultimately led to Nextdoor. In fact, when we met, and maybe Megha can give some perspective on this, I remember we were dating at the beginning and Fanbase, which was the name of the sports company, was not going well. And you really take it personally as an entrepreneur. I mean, it's your identity, right? I mean, because people ask you, what do you do? And you don't say, oh, I work at Neutrogena, I work at Shondaland, I work at some brand, right? You say, oh, I've started this thing. And then you tell them the name and they haven't heard of it. And they're like, what is this guy doing? Does he even have a job, right? And I remember when I first met Megha's sister and Megha's sister's husband, both of whom are very successful physicians. And we went to this dinner and they were asking me, what do you do, right? Because, I mean, if your sibling introduces you to her boyfriend, you want to make sure that the person's actually real, right? And so they were asking me, what do you do? And I'm trying to tell this story of, oh, I started this company. It's not really working. We're thinking maybe we're going to do something different, right? It was not an easy time. But I always say Megha was my good luck charm.
You spoke a moment ago about kind of the entrepreneurial's dream, and you talked about that period pre the bust, 99, 2000. And when you did, Nirav, your voice jumped and your eyes sparkled. Do you think that dream exists today?
Oh, gosh, more than ever. I think that's the American dream that we're talking about. I mean, you talk about this podcast, right? I mean, yes, there are challenges facing society today.
Sure.
But so many of those challenges, so many of them can be overcome if people feel like they have possibility. If they feel like they can rise above whatever they feel is holding them down. In fact, this moment in the Metroplex, to me, is a Silicon Valley type moment. And so, yes, I mean, I believe it more deeply than I ever have. And to me, it is the essence of America.
bridge that. In 21, you moved to Dallas.
Yep.
Again, pretty significant difference from some of the places. We're a little short on, I think we've got an awful lot, but we're a little bit short on oceans and mountains.
Yes.
Why Dallas?
Family. So Nirav and I, we actually moved to Dallas from Florence, Italy. We had spent, all of our children were born in San Francisco. Obviously, Nirav was...
So you had been with Nextdoor,
Yes.
left in 18,
That's
and then
right.
really did a sabbatical.
That's
I think
right.
something everybody would love to do. Went to Florence, lived there, did some teaching there.
That's right. I studied Italian. He taught. We really saw it as a moment in there are professional moments and personal life moments. And I think the two of us looked at each other while Nirav had a moment to kind of breathe. We looked at each other and said, this could be a really great experience for our family. Mm-hmm. Something where we're all on equal footing. None of us have lived, our kids, our children, we could all go experience this together through each other's eyes. And so I was actually still kind of on the up and up in my career. I had just joined the management team of my company.
Megha had just been promoted
about a year earlier. But, I do believe that the choices in life, they're not always linear in that it's professional and personal. And this was a great opportunity for our family to build this experience. So in 2019, I stepped down. Nirav had already stepped down, and we packed up and we took our 3 kids. They were 6, 5, and 3 to Florence, Italy. And it is as magical as one could imagine. I will say it was also challenging, like any move is, especially to a foreign country that isn't primarily operated in your native language. But Nirav and I certainly like a good challenge, but you take for granted, living where you're so comfortable, like going to the grocery store. We pick up our fruits and vegetables, we put it in the cart, and then we check out. I'll never forget, I was in Italy picking up my fruits and vegetables, standing in line, and then someone sort of yelling at me in Italian. I couldn't figure out why they were so upset. And it was that I had to go weigh my fruits and vegetables, get the sticker, and then pay. So just these little...
It all comes around Central Market.
Exactly. That's true. So there are just so many of those stories that really pushed us and challenged us personally. But we were living abroad before COVID, and then obviously during COVID. So we did go back to San Francisco for a short stint while the world was still trying to figure out, is this something that's short-term, long-term, midterm?
Right.
And while we were there, we realized that San Francisco, our beloved city, had changed and was going to continue to change. And these are the prime years of our kids' lives, call it 5 to 15. And we really wanted our children to be able to be outside playing. And so while we went back to Italy for another 15 months, we started contemplating on where's home going to be. We sort of had this courageous spirit of, we've already moved across the country, we can move across the world, we can move anywhere else. And as we talked about at the beginning of the podcast, family is so important to the two of us. If we remained in California, we knew we would still be in Silicon Valley because that's sort of where the epicenter of Nirav's industry is. And so we would likely not be in California and move near my parents in Los Angeles. We looked at each other and we said, why don't we just move near the Tolia side and try Dallas? So Dallas was really about family for us. And at the time, we weren't tethered to any job.
Yeah, my parents had retired. Mm-hmm. They had moved to Dallas. Before that, my brother, who's not the black sheep like me, had gone to Southwestern Medical School and was practicing medicine with his physician wife, living in Dallas with their 2 kids. And so my entire side of the family was in Dallas. And we had this opportunity to come to Dallas. And I don't think we saw it as a permanent move. We didn't necessarily see it as an impermanent move either. But living in Florence for 2 years gave us the courage that this is what Jeff Bezos refers to as a 2-way door. You can go through the door and move to Dallas, Texas. And if for some reason you need to move somewhere else, you can go back the way you came and either go back to San Francisco or someplace else. And so it was an experiment and, again, a lesson that if you have the courage to try things and you make the best of those things whenever you take the chance, some really amazing things can happen. But this was about family. And you asked us about our values. We talk about hard work. We talk about family, right? It's not always easy to prioritize family when your job is so important. And so coming off of this stretch where Nextdoor was the 3rd company I'd started, Megha was just in the prime of her career, having been promoted and being part of a management team and understanding and realizing all those things that she'd worked for, right? We also realized that our kids were young and that we wanted to spend time with them and with each other. And so to step back and be able to go to a foreign country, right, that gave us the courage not only to do it, but to really enjoy that and to say it's okay not to work for a while. It's okay if your identity is that you're just on a sabbatical with your kids.
We certainly realize that opportunity is not available to all. And so we feel incredibly blessed that we had the choice to do that.
Yeah, sure.
I think most people would admire and be envious of that opportunity.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that gave us the courage is one of the things that Nirav and I don't think we realize this outwardly, but we often ask ourselves, when you're trying to make a big decision, whether it be at work or personal or any big decision, it's so easy to go to the why this is so hard and all the reasons why this decision is not going to pan out. But when you're trying to create transformational change in any aspect, one of the things that I think the two of us tend to ask ourselves is what has to be true? And once you answer, when you make the decision, you ask yourself what has to be true, then it's about lining up everything else to make that true, as opposed to because if you think about all these moves that we've done or these career choices and changes, they're not necessarily natural. They have required sort of an intentional choice.
Well, I want to put the bow on Dallas, and I want to talk about two things. Dallas, I wouldn't say, is vastly known for its fully entrepreneurial spirit, though it has a rich entrepreneurial spirit of wildcatters in the oil business and in commercial real estate. Trammell Crow, the Hunts come to mind, et cetera. But y'all have really stepped in and got involved at SMU, which is my alma mater. And going to SMU, and my parents went to SMU, and I love the school, obviously. I wouldn't say that SMU has been an entrepreneurial first institution either. Talk to me about why you're involved in the Spears Institute for Entrepreneurship, which has been a huge blessing, frankly, for SMU. But talk to me why you're involved and what you're hoping for. Your involvement, the time, the richness of the accelerator program, et cetera, how to drive students towards entrepreneurial hope and gain in a lot of ways in the marketplace.
And look, I will let Megha talk about how we got involved because it's an interesting story. But let me kind of back up for a second. We're all in on Dallas.
Love it.
We don't think Dallas should apologize for anything.
It's great.
This is an amazing place. This has amazing entrepreneurs, right? Now, I wouldn't say it has as many tech entrepreneurs as there are in Silicon Valley, but that's something we can change. This is a moment for Dallas where, like we've done so many times in our lives, we've stepped through a door, we've seen an amazing opportunity, and we've done whatever we can to grab it. That's what everyone who lives in Dallas should be doing right now. I mean, people love Dallas. The quality of life is amazing. People are coming in from all different parts of the country and the world, right? This is an amazing opportunity.
California,
I think SMU
probably
sits
top of the list.
Well, I mean, look, and honestly, I think California's great too. I mean, when I go back to Silicon Valley, there's this AI boom happening there, right? So one of the things that we've come to really appreciate is people ask us all the time, okay, you lived in Florence, Italy. Do you now love Italy? Yes, we love Italy, but we also love the United States. Right. You can feel at home in more than one place. In fact, it's one of the most special feelings of them all, right? You can appreciate what's great about lots of different places. Now, Dallas objectively has a lot going for it. What we would like to see in Dallas, though, it has become an amazing place if you have a very large established business to relocate that business because the cost of living is great for people. The schools are amazing. If you have 10,000 employees, it's hard to think about a better place to set your headquarters for your people, right? Maybe where Dallas can start to really shine as well, though, is going back to that pioneering spirit, the oil and gas wildcatters, that tradition that exists here, and thinking about in this next set of revolutions, which are largely going to be driven by technology, why not Dallas as a superpower as well?
Well, and I think through the generosity of Bill Spears and through y'all and others, Josh Taylor's been now brought in, and I think there's a real emphasis being started at SMU. I started a business out of college, so I cashed out my savings, moved home, did the song and dance, played the game for 8 years. So I very richly know this story, being in Dallas, going to SMU, and understanding, and hearing what you're talking about. I resonate so deeply. Ultimately, SMU has an opportunity to go change and expand itself. And I just would love to hear y'all's view on, give me 5 years out. What's the vision? Vision casts a little bit for the institution and the university per your involvement.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I wanted to just add on to what Nirav was saying is, with the world being so flat and technology enabling that, we really believe that we don't have to have these clusters per geography for the industries, right? So it's always been LA for entertainment and Hollywood, Silicon Valley for tech, New York for finance, obviously the Texas area for oil and gas and real estate. And we really believe that needs to evolve as we have all of these technological advancements to enable, and talent can be anywhere. And so that's kind of the background of why we believe that industries can be brought to any part of the country. And we love being a part of that here in Dallas. We got involved with the Spears Institute. Ironically, it kind of goes back to sort of our belief in neighbor and community. Our next door neighbor,
literally
our next door neighbor. It's Dr. William Spears and his beautiful wife, Candy Spears. And we have gotten to know them over the time of living next to them. And they're just wonderful, delightful people. Dr. Spears himself is an incredible entrepreneur. And we have such admiration and respect for the two of them. So one day I guess it was over dinner, he invited us over to dinner and was talking to us about his gift and his vision. And of course, we were so impressed and we're all in on his vision.
I mean, speaking of Dallas, by the way, Dr. Spears did not attend SMU.
100%.
And to give the largest donation from a non-alum, right? I mean, it says a lot about his belief in the school, in the area, the importance of entrepreneurship. And I believe at that dinner, he had also invited Dr. Gerald Turner.
Well, the first encounter with him, he kind of shares with us his vision. And we say, that's amazing. Let us know how we can be helpful, a part of it. We weren't thinking really a part of it. And so that was our first meeting. And then a couple weeks later, he invites us again, I think, to dinner. Mm-hmm. And as we knew that there would be some other folks there, and it was President Turner and Gail Turner. Okay. Yeah. And so we realized there was more to this dinner than just sort of, warm bread and bright wine. Yeah. Exactly.
We had never even been on the SMU campus
yet. We were still so new to Dallas.
Right.
And so we have this wonderful dinner, and we continue to talk about Dr. Spears' vision and obviously Dr. Turner's vision as well. And the dinner ends with, we're really looking for two leaders to be co-founding directors of the Institute. How do you both feel about taking this on? And we sort of looked at each other and, I just said about the importance of saying what has to be true versus all the reasons why you shouldn't do something. At that moment, I was thinking, we both have full-time jobs. We have 3 kids, under 10. Uh-huh. When we do something, we love to do it 110%. And so I was thinking, I'm not sure this is something we can take on, but you cannot say no to Dr. Turner or Dr. Spears. I mean, that is not a word that is in their vocabulary or anything that's accepted. And so through their charm and obviously the amazing vision, we were so honored, and we humbly accepted the role. And since then, it's been a wonderful melting of the minds as we continue to create. You asked for us, like, what's the vision? I mean, I think truly, like any entrepreneurial endeavor, obviously we have the vision of being sort of the school where you can come to get all the support and tools that you need to be as successful as possible in your entrepreneurial journey. And we want you to come to SMU to build ideas, foster ideas, and stay in Texas. Mm-hmm. That is ultimately our dream. We know that we have to ebb and flow along the way. Like any starting of a new company, that's kind of what we're doing. We're trying to figure out 2 steps forward, 1 step to the side, what works, what doesn't work. There are a lot of constituents at hand, obviously the community, the students, the faculty, then those of us on the business side. So it's been an incredible journey to date, and we are just getting started. But really, one of the things we believe is if you can see it, Nirav talked about this for himself in the beginning, but if you can see it, you can be it. Mm-hmm. And just so much of learning is access and providing the opportunities based on what you see. And so we are focused on being that.
And what I saw at Stanford was you can have lots of disparate conversations between entrepreneurs. You can have lots of different opportunities. Mm-hmm. If you have a place that centralizes all of that passion and creates a kind of hub where people can come together, not only can they see and be inspired by people who've done it, they meet each other and they have the courage to do things because going back to community, they've tapped into a community. And so a lot of what we're trying to do is create SMU alongside all the other great communities that SMU has, create a community that is all about supporting entrepreneurs. And that will be good for SMU. It will be good for Dallas. It will be good for the world.
Yeah.
There's 2 chapters before we close. We've got to hit one for each of you. You had talked about brand management and the success in brand management. And then all of a sudden, you end up as the COO of one of the largest production companies in Hollywood. Had done Grey's Anatomy, had done Scandals, and 2 of your biggest achievements were Bridgerton and Inviting Anna.
Inventing Anna. Mm-hmm. Yes, and most recently, The Residents.
And The Residents. Talk about that why in the world go from traditional brand management business, which is typical business school, to something that some people may not even call it business?
I can tell you that the night before I started, I asked myself the very same question. And I thought, did they really understand that I had not worked in media when they offered me the position? What I will say is so much of my success and opportunities have been because people take a chance on me. At Johnson & Johnson, there was particularly someone who took a chance on me, and she was the president at the time, and her name was Susan Sweet. At Method, it's Drew Frazier, who I still have so much admiration and love for, and he took a chance on me and gave me these opportunities. And when it came to Shondaland, there's a dear friend of ours named Chris Silberman, and clearly he saw something in me that wanted to put me into the seat at Shondaland. So he is Shonda Rhimes' agent. Right. And, as agents, you're really also a full business operator and manager. And so he was doing a lot of that for the team. As Shonda has had significant success and growth over the years, he's sort of been her business arm in many ways. And so I think, kudos to him, and very smart of him to see that there is an opportunity to bring sort of traditionally business-minded talent folks into the entertainment world. And I do believe this is going to continue as production companies take on, brands as themselves, as celebrities continue to be their own personal brands. I think this is something we're going to continue to see. And so he and I got to talking, and then I met Shonda, and we sort of talked about the opportunities that we saw for the production company and really turning it into what we believe is a lifestyle brand. Shonda touches so much of our lives and the team in our households. She's pushing the conversation forward culturally. She's creating, asking us to think differently. And the team is also providing us these wonderful moments of escape as we watch the TV shows that this talented team develops. And so I was definitely nervous. On December 5th, as my first day was December 6th, thinking, how am I going to bridge my experiences? But, I took a step back and I thought, I'm a systems thinker. I know that I love to solve hard problems. And the reason why I took the opportunity is I wanted to be challenged at that point in my career. Upon moving back to the U.S. from Italy, as much as I love consumer products, my children were growing up, and I thought, if I'm going to put the jersey back on, it's got to be something that's going to give me butterflies. I'm going to be really nervous to do so and really have to prove to myself, can I do this? And it's been really interesting. Like many businesses, we say it on the personal side, it's all of us live the same lives, but just in different houses. It was very refreshing to enter the company and to start to see that although the acronyms were different, although the vocabulary was different, there are so many similarities, and it was just about identifying those threads and piecing them together and building a strategy that we could all work towards.
Terrific.
Great.
The Nextdoor, there's a couple pieces we left out. So when you joined Nextdoor, you weren't really the technology founder. You came out of the investment side of it, or the investor side, a firm that was actually one of the major investors on the front end of Nextdoor.
Yes, there were a number of founders, and we as founders, I would say there were three main founders. I was maybe a business founder. I had a co-founder who I'd worked with at Epinions, the first company, who was another business and marketing founder. And then we had a technology founder as well that we'd also worked with at Epinions. I mean, it goes back to, it's about the team at the end of the day, right? I mean, a single person can only do so much. Maybe you're Elon Musk, maybe you're Jeff Bezos, right? I'm neither of those people. I need great people around me, whether it's my wife or the people that I started Nextdoor with. And so it's less to me about what's the role you're going to play, and it's more about, do you have the people around you that when you create the composite of those folks together, you can cover all the bases.
So you left, as we've talked about, took that sabbatical, and then came back. Talk about the circumstances of coming back, where you are today, and where you want to see Nextdoor go.
Sure. So I was the one of the founders and the original CEO of the company, starting the summer of 2010. And then by the end of 2018, I had moved on. We hired another CEO. Everyone around the table felt at that point that we needed a new CEO to help Nextdoor really achieve its potential. And over the years that I left, the company did continue to scale. It went public. It had a very successful IPO, and it became largely what you see today. Post-COVID, like has happened to many internet companies, Nextdoor lost its way. The product was not adding enough value to people's lives. The business model was not strong enough to really grow the way technology companies should grow. And this amazing idea that had turned into this amazing company that touches so many people in positive ways, it wasn't actually scaling or realizing the potential that everyone felt like it might have. And so Megha and I are watching this, and it's not easy to watch because you will always feel connected to a company that you've started, always. Right? But at the same time, Megha and I know if you're not in the seat running the company, you really shouldn't be criticizing the people who are because you have no sense of what's going on the inside, right? So we were the head cheerleaders, and we were hoping that Nextdoor would continue to go well, and it just wasn't for whatever reason. And so in much the same way was the case when I left the board, and I was on the board this entire time, we decided that we needed to have a new leader because sometimes that's what you need to do the transformative things to change trajectories. Now, I did not think that that new leader would be me or even should be me. I was living in Dallas. At that point, I had become a full-time investor. I had joined a $7 billion venture capital firm that had invested in Nextdoor, and I was sitting on many boards. And as I like to joke, I was enjoying giving CEOs advice versus having to take advice from investors. But when I went and talked with Megha about the opportunity to go back, we had to confront two different things. One was the reality of how disruptive this would be for our lives. And it was going to be incredibly disruptive because Nextdoor was not in Dallas. Nextdoor was in San Francisco, in New York, in London, right? Nextdoor was a company that I had started, but I hadn't worked there for 5 years. I hadn't even been a CEO for 5 years. So just think about what had happened during those 5 years. COVID had happened. Remote working had happened, right? AI had started to happen. And so many of these things you need to be in the middle of to really understand. So that was a very hard reality. Plus, we were just getting to really feel comfortable in Dallas. And we were enjoying the quality of life that you don't necessarily always have when you're an operator. In fact, Megha was an operator at the time. And so we were kind of thinking, all right, if one of us wants to operate, that's possible, right? We can still give our children, who are really our priority, my parents, who we moved here for, we can give them the time they deserve. If both of us are operating companies, that's going to be really, really tricky. But the other side of it was, Megha said to me, you don't want to have regrets. Yeah. It's actually one of the things that we never want to feel like we didn't do something that ultimately we wanted to do or we should have done or we could have done. And she said, if Nextdoor doesn't turn around and ultimately goes away, I know what it means to you, what it means to us. I think you're going to regret if you don't go in there and try to do something about this. And so in a very spontaneous way, I won't say serendipitous because that has positive connotations. I'll say spontaneous because sometimes there's spontaneous combustion, right? Which sometimes I wonder about. I went from one day being a Dallas person, investing in companies and enjoying taking my children to school in the morning and picking them up in the afternoon, to being in San Francisco for 100 nights in 2024 because I felt like I needed to be near my colleagues. And so I've been back for a year and a half. I'm really thrilled to say that we are now hiring people in Dallas. And so we still have people in San Francisco. We have people in New York. We have people all over the country and all over the world because we need to understand communities no matter where they are, right? Not just the California ones or the New York ones or the Texas ones, but we are going to hire people in Dallas as well. I believe Dallas is an amazing place for us to hire technology folks and other folks that want to be part of a company like Nextdoor. And we are trying like crazy to turn this thing around because ultimately we do believe that in a world that is increasingly divided, technology, unfortunately, is one of the culprits in this division. Technology can make us feel more lonely. We sit at home at night, we scroll endlessly through our feeds, right? We need technology to find a way to bring us together. And in whatever small way I can do that, and I think Megha supports me in this, we think Nextdoor can be a small part in bringing people together. And that's worth fighting for.
You've clearly shown the growth of it. You mentioned earlier over 100 million subscribers, participants in Nextdoor. You've got gross margins that any business would be envious of, but still facing operating losses that are in the 9 digits.
No. We said at our last earnings call, we said at our last earnings call that starting in Q4 of this year, we'll be break even. and we said we would do the same in 2026. But really, that is not the headline story for Nextdoor. The headline story is we believe that there is a need for technology to create a better local experience for everyone in the world. And that's the opportunity for Nextdoor. And if we can serve that opportunity, this company will be a multi-$100 billion company, right? But it's not easy to do that because you need to build a product that delights people. And today, as Megha tells me, and as I agree with her, we're not delighting people enough. And so we got to go back to the drawing board. Mm-hmm. We have to build great experiences. We have to listen to our neighbors. We have to listen to our advertisers. We have to understand the best way to serve them. And if we can build value, there is no doubt this will be an incredibly successful company.
So for the user, what does Nextdoor look like in 5 years? Two or 5 years?
That is a great question. So I will tell you in the fewest words possible, which is rare for me, as you can tell. If it's happening in your neighborhood, it's on Nextdoor. Period. Because everyone wants to know what's going on around me. But there is no easy way to find that information. In fact, local information and local word of mouth is one of the last things to not be digitized today. You can't go to ChatGPT and say, what's going on in my neighborhood? ChatGPT doesn't know. Google doesn't know. So if it's happening in my neighborhood, it's on Nextdoor. That's the vision.
Well, this has been fantastic. We've had such a joy having y'all in this room. Thank you so much for being here. We're excited for all that you're involved with in Dallas. Grateful on a personal note, just that your involvement in SMU. It really is. It's wonderful for me to see. And
it's great to meet a Mustang.
Yeah, exactly.
So
Mustang. We're very grateful for your involvement here, and thanks for being on the pod.
Thank you
appreciate
both
it. Thank you very much.
for having us.
We really appreciate it.